All right, we're going to continue on here, and he says, he's talking about insanity, and he's asking, is insanity a affection of the mind or the brain? And he says that, indeed, it is by a feeling comparable to the sensation of giddiness that madness is, in many cases, makes its first appearance. The patient feels bewildered, as if he were losing his way. Remember, Bergson thinks that the brain is an organ of attention to life. So that when you start going, when this, when the tension, when threads that keep us securely, keep our attention securely um, uh, bolstered to or bolted to reality, or keep us secured to reality and material things on which we lean. When that happens, the patient feels bewildered as if he was losing his way. He will tell you that the material objects no longer for him their former solidity, relief, and reality. In fact, a loosening of the tension, or rather of the attention to life, which keeps the mind fixed on the part of the material world which concerns its action, such is the only direct result of cerebral derangement. For the brain is the assemblage of all the contrivances which allow the mind to respond to the action of things by motor reactions, effected or simply nascent, which secure by their accuracy the perfect insertion of the mind in reality. So, such in broad outline seems to be the relation Such in broad outline seems to be the relation of the mind to the body. It is impossible for me here to enumerate the facts and the arguments on which this conception is founded. And yet I cannot expect you to take my word. What am I to do? There is one way, I think, in which it is possible to dispose finally of that theory, of the theory I am opposing, the materialist theory. And that is by showing that, taken literally, the hypothesis of an equivalence between the cerebral and the mental is self-contradictory, that it requires us to adopt two positions, or two opposite points of view at one and the same time, and use two systems of notation simultaneously when they are mutually exclusive. I attempted some years ago to prove this, but although the argument is simple enough, it involves certain preliminary considerations concerning realism and idealism, which would take some time to expound. I admit, moreover, that it is possible to give the theory of equivalence an appearance of intelligibility when we cease to push it in the materialist direction, the idealism. And then again, though pure reasoning may suffice to prove the theory untenable, it does not and cannot tell us what to put in its place. So that it is to experience we have to address ourselves, as I have already hinted. But how could we review here the normal and pathological facts of which we must take account? To examine them all is impossible. To examine all of the facts is impossible. To examine thoroughly any one of them would still be too long. The only way I see out of the difficulty is selecting, from among all the known facts, those in psychology, those which seem most favorable to the theory of parallelism. These, without question, are the facts of memory. In these alone does the theory seem to find the beginning of verification, the theory of equivalence, which Bergson is opposing. If, then, I could indicate in a few words how a thorough investigation of these facts would result in invalidating the theory which has appealed to them, and in confirming that which I am putting forward, something at least would have been gained. It would not be the complete demonstration, far from it, but we should at least know where to seek for it. Now, let us try. Now, the only function of thought which has been possible actually to locate in the brain is memory, the memory of words, to be exact. I drew your attention in the beginning of this lecture to the manner in which the study of diseases affecting speech has led to localizing in certain convolutions of the brain certain forms of verbal memory. Since Broca, the neuroscientist, or the anatomist, yeah, since Broca was a physiologist, I guess also, he's a lot of things. Since Broca, who was the first to demonstrate that a lesion of the third left frontal convolution, now known as Broca's area, um, resulted in the forgetting of articulate speech movements, a theory of aphasia and its cerebral conditions, more and more complicated, has been laboriously built up. On this theory I should have much to say. It has been opposed lately by investigators of acknowledged competence, who base their arguments on a closer observation of the cerebral lesions which accompany maladies affecting speech. I myself, nearly 20 years ago, by analysis of the mechanism of speech and thought alone, was led to declare that the doctrine then considered unquestionable at least required revision. However, I shall leave all this aside. There is one point at least on which we all agree, namely, that diseases of word memory are caused by lesions of the brain more or less clearly localizable. Let us see, then, how this fact is interpreted by the doctrine according to which thought is a function of the brain, and more generally by the theory of those who believe in a parallelism or in an equivalence between the work of the brain and that of thought. Nothing is simpler than their explanation. The recollections of the words are said to be there, stored in the brain in the form of modifications impressed on particular groups of anatomical elements. If they disappear from the memory, it is because the cells in which they lie are altered or destroyed. We spoke just now of sensitive plates and of phonograms. It is this sort of comparison we find in all the cerebral explanations of memory. Impressions made by external objects are supposed to subsist in the brain as it were on a sensitive plate or a phonographic disc. Much like today, the metaphor is computer algorithms and stuff. So impressions made by external objects are supposed to subsist in the brain as it were on a sensitive plate or a phonographic disc or computer. But when we look more closely, we see how fallacious these comparisons are. If, for example, the visual recollection of an object were really an impression left by that object on the brain, there would not be one recollection of an object. There will be thousands, even millions of them. For the simplest, most stable object changes its form, its size, and its shade of color according to the point of view from which it is perceived. Right? He says that unless then I condemn myself to a position absolutely fixed when looking at it, unless my eye remains immovable in its socket, countless images in no way superposable will be outlined successively on my retina and transmitted to my brain. And what must the number of the images be if the visual image is of a person whose expression changes, whose body is mobile, whose clothing and environment are different each time I see him? Yet it is unquestionable that my consciousness does present to me a unique image, or, what amounts to the same, a practically invariable recollection of the object or person. This is evident proof that there is something quite different here from mechanical registration. What he's saying is that the classical theory of memory says that, in his time at least, says that there's a mechanical registration of the brain where we look at the object and it impresses the memory on the brain, and that's where the memory is stored. Well, what he's saying is that can't be, because objects they change their size, their form, their color, and all depending on the perspective from which I take. So there's like millions of different impressions that are made in my eye. So we would have millions, but yet, and even in people, they're wearing different clothes, they're in different contexts, different environments, they're growing, they're changing, they move, they're mobile. Which one of these impressions serves as the one memory that I have of the person or the object? I only have one memory. I have one unique or invariable memory which first comes to mind whenever I think about an object or try to recollect about an object or a word or a person. But yet there's innumerable multiplicity of these that could be selected from. So he says that this is proof that we're not talking here about a mechanical registration of the brain. And what must then, let's see here, this person, okay, note that we might say just as much of the auditory recollection. The same word pronounced by different persons or by the same person at different times in different sentences gives phonograms which do not coincide with one another. Literally, if we're going to play phonograms, we would get different phonograms.